What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Alright, today's video, we're going to be talking about X-Men Red number 7 by Al Ewing and Stefano Caselli. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down why Magneto's last words to Storm were to not trust Charles Xavier. We're also going to talk about why a.x.e the Unbeaten's power always allows her to win, but at the same time, she still loses.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
Okay, so the main thing to take away with this issue is that the death of Magneto is 100% cemented. If it seemed like, oh, maybe he might survive by the end of Judgment Day number 4 as well as X-Men Red number 6. No, that is not the case. Magneto is very dead. His backup has been wiped, and it's not even so much that he can't be resurrected. He actually can be resurrected even without a backup. Storm even mentions that she could keep him alive, even if only a little bit longer for them to figure something out. Truth of the matter is, Magneto wants to stand by his word that he said that should he die, he will not be resurrected the way other Krakoan mutants are resurrected, that he wants to do right by Arakko to live the way they live, because deep down he knows they need Arakko, and in order for Arakko to see Krakoa as equals, they need to actually stand on similar footing as other Arakkans. And once again, he can technically be resurrected regardless of having no backup because of something that took place during Trial of Magneto, where Wanda Maximoff helped Krakoa create the waiting room. This is a new area of the astral plane where any mutant, regardless of whether they have a mutant backup, a resurrection backup, whatever, they can go to the waiting room and await resurrection. This is something that was introduced at the end of Trial of Magneto and is why a lot of other mutants who have been dead for a long time and very likely died prior to Charles backing up the minds of all the various mutants in the Marvel Comics universe. That's why a lot of them have been coming back recently. This is how Magneto could actually return despite having no actual backup. But he doesn't want to, because the decision to be resurrected in that fashion is voluntary only. You can't force someone to be resurrected that way. If they don't want to come back, they don't come back. Magneto is accepting his death. He knows this is the end for him, but he's worried about the future of Krakoa and that he still recognizes there are enemies at their gates. There is still Orchis, there is still Zeno, there are also what is perceived here as possibly the looming threat of the return of the Sentinel program. This could easily just be Magneto hallucinating things, but it has actually been a while since we've seen legit Sentinels in the Marvel Comics universe, at least since House of X. And Magneto seems to be of the belief that there is possibly a chance that they will be back. And with Orchis out there, and we know they already have the creation of Nimrod at their disposal, it's very likely Sentinels will be popping back up eventually. And the reason why Magneto warns Aurora to watch after Charles, it's not so much that she shouldn't trust him, but she does need to keep her eye on him, because Charles is a troubled man. He's a guy who wants to do the right thing, even if a lot of the times him wanting to do the right thing is often misguided. He wants there to be peace between humans and mutants, but Magneto knows that Charles will go through any means to try to get it, even if it means putting mutants at risk. Magneto is worried with all of these various and sundry enemies pounding on Krakoa's doorstep, with Mora having aligned herself with Orchis, with every single enemy that is literally waiting to burn Krakoa to the ground. Charles is going to be forced to make a decision, one that could very likely be the end of everything. And I kind of feel like this is probably the first time we've really seen an actual hint at the end of the Krakoan era, which I'm pretty sure is coming very quickly to a close within the next year or so. Eventually, at some point, everything is going to go back to a status quo for the X-Men. They have had the House of X era. There will very likely be an end to that coming very soon. And Magneto is worried that when that end does actually come, Charles is going to basically doom everyone, but we don't necessarily know how. But I feel like whatever it is, it will have to do with Nimrod finally pulling up on Krakoa. An enemy Charles already knows they're not equipped to defeat. Magneto and Charles both died at the hands of Nimrod during the events of Inferno, and they were handily defeated. It wasn't even close in any way, shape, form, or fashion. So Charles knows the type of destruction Nimrod is capable of, and he is probably going to do something very stupid that is going to risk everyone. We already know he has Forge working on secret projects, things to help take down the Children of the Vault. As we have seen recently in X-Men number 15, there's very likely other projects he has Forge working on that are dangerous weapons that could potentially be used to help defend Krakoa, but could just as easily doom the entire Krakoan experiment. Charles wants mutants to be accepted at all cost. Charles would very likely risk mutant kind to save humanity as well. That's another very real possibility that I feel Magneto has likely seen as well. That not just with the destruction of Krakoa looming, it could very easily be that Charles would risk mutant kind to save humanity who doesn't even give a damn about them. This is why Magneto wants Storm to keep a very close eye on Charles, because right now Charles has no system of checks and balances to keep him in line. Magneto is dead, Moira has betrayed them, and Apocalypse is still on sabbatical. There's no one there to talk any sense into him. And while I know what some people are probably thinking, those who are familiar with the recent events of Jonathan Hickman's Inferno probably remember that Charles Xavier, as well as Magneto, were put on the outs with the Quiet Council, to the point where pretty much no one will vote with them on anything if they don't have to. But regardless of that, Charles still has allies on the council. Kate Pryde, Nightcrawler, Colossus, and Storm, they are all very much still his allies on the council, even if they're mad at him right now, or worse, disappointed in him for keeping the secret of Moira McTaggart and all the other stuff that we learned in House of X number 2. Regardless of all that, they would probably still vote in his favor if he presented something that seemed attractive enough of an offer, if Charles dressed it up in such a way that it was the only way things could go down. Characters like Hope Summers would probably be on the fence on this matter, but we already know characters like Sebastian Shaw, Emma Frost, Mystique, and Destiny, Mr. Sinister, they would very likely vote against anything Charles had to offer just on principle alone. But those other characters I mentioned, those characters who used to be members of the X-Men, like some of his earliest pupils, they would very likely, out of just some sense of duty or familiarity, would probably vote with him more often than not. These are characters who have seen Charles at some of his worst and at some of his best, and yet they've always followed him for the most part. So yeah, it stands to reason that if Charles came up with some kind of an idea that could potentially doom Krakoa, even if it didn't seem like it on the surface level, but it would in the long term, I think they would vote along with it if they didn't know any better. We've already seen that the Quiet Council has voted on things that were questionable during the current events of Judgment Day, where knowing that there is a potential risk of destroying the progenitor resulting in the destruction of a very large portion of humanity, everyone voted along with it because Destiny fudged the numbers. She made it seem as though there would be less human casualties than what there actually would have been. And we did learn that a lot of the characters that did vote in favor of Destiny's plan to destroy the progenitor to save the entire Earth, it was revealed that more than a few of them would not have went along with Destiny's plan had they known the truth. So we've already established that a lot of the members of the Quiet Council, even characters like Exodus and Mystique, regardless of how cold-hearted they can sometimes be, even they are more likely to vote on something if it seems like there's less risk involved to humanity. So imagine how they would feel if there was less risk to mutant kind, if it was presented in such a way that Krakoa would see less risk going one way versus the other. The other thing I want to talk about with this is what's going on with Iska the Unbeaten. We actually get a little bit more character development out of Iska the Unbeaten in this issue than I think we are accustomed to, and right now she is being held to task because she betrayed the Great Ring. She killed Idil in X-Men Red number 5, and she defected to help Uranos, and this was a betrayal to the Great Ring of Arakko. And while the rest of the Great Ring feel that she is a traitor, especially Lodos Logos, who wants to hold her to task for her treachery, it turns out that Iska isn't very interested in the idea of being judged, and while other characters like Ora Sarada or Zelo don't really see a precedent in what they could do to Iska to judge her, or if they even have a right to judge her for what she's done just based on how they've lost so much information about their history and their laws just based on Uranos's attack alone. No one really knows what to do with Iska, but Iska is challenged by the Fisher King of the recently returned Night Seats. Iska makes it clear that there's no way any of them could defeat her, even if they all pulled their might together. No one could defeat her, because what you have to take a look at here is that Iska's power is that she can't lose, and that doesn't just apply to card games and games of chance, it also applies to fights. She has defeated every member of the Great Ring of Araco, whether it was in actual combat or even just simple sparring, where it shows that she has defeated Storm, seemingly without even having to bat an eyelash. But just the same, the Great Ring wants to challenge her, with Storm willing to lead the charge, knowing that she wouldn't win. She would still stand up to Iska and face her down, because that is what heroes do. The Great Ring of Araco wants to see change, and that change is fast approaching because Iska is challenged by the Fisher King. He wants to face her not in a contest of strength, but in a contest of understanding, where he simply puts, the winner is the one who understands the meaning of loss the most. Now, I said at the beginning of this video that Iska's power is to always win, but at the same time, she can still lose, just not in the way that a lot of people traditionally think about. And while I wish we would have actually gotten more of a depiction of this, we actually get this in a data page in this issue, and it just catalogs her earliest memories, which for a character who's been alive as long as Iska has, which has been 10,000 years, it's quite a long time, but they sum it up fairly easily here. Ever since she was a kid, when her powers actually kicked in, whether she realized it back then or not, she has always won, and with that came a certain sense of loss, because even when she won, there was always this emptiness, because she always knew the reason why she won wasn't necessarily because she was good or great at anything, it's just the way things were. As it's even stated herself, over time, the novelty on winning all the time faded away. And then over the years, between all of the war between the Amenthi Horde and Araco, and everything that happened with Genesis turning over to Annihilation, and all of those events that took place during Ten of Swords and prior to that, every time she defected when it was necessary, because that's just how her power worked. She can't lose. Even when those decisions that are made, she doesn't enjoy them. It's even as plain as day in Jonathan Hickman's X-Men number 14 that when she makes the choice to betray her side, because that's what Genesis needed her to do, and to keep the secret of what Genesis was going to do in turning herself over to Annihilation, that wasn't something she did lightly, because once again, she won, but at the same time, she lost her sister. She's lost the people that she loves, her family, her husband, and she carried the stain of being referred to as an oath breaker and a traitor for thousands of years. All the times that she shifted back and forth between different factions and alliances was all due to the nature of how her powers work. She doesn't have a choice in any of this, and that's why she loses. She loses even when she wins, because she never has a choice. We saw this very recently in X-Men Red number 3, where she was forced to basically doom Tarn the Uncaring to death at the hands of Magneto, all because Sunspot threw out a bet knowing how her powers worked. Iska was clearly wanting to back Tarn the Uncaring, but because Sunspot beat her to the punch and said that he bets that Tarn wins, that means Iska had to pick Magneto. It wasn't a choice. It's not an active or conscious thing. Her power works in a lot of the same ways as Domino's probability manipulation powers. Domino doesn't actively manipulate probability. It just happens around her. She doesn't get to choose how all these things work. She just puts herself into a situation and her powers just work everything else out from there. And it's not even a guarantee that her powers will actually work in her favor, it's just that she's more likely to walk away with a favorable outcome than anyone else would in her situation. This is something I talked about in my video for the recent X-Force Annual number 1. Domino was dropped down one of 4 different tubes, and while all 4 of those tubes would eventually lead to her death, all of them were death traps that were inescapable. Her luck factor led her to the tube that would let her live the longest. That wasn't an active choice on her part, and that's the same way Iska the Unbeaten's powers work. This game of understanding wasn't meant for Iska to lose either, because she does understand loss more than anything else, and with the Fisher King challenging her to a contest of this nature, it forced her to remember all of the pain and suffering she has felt as a result of her powers, all the mistakes that she has made against her own will, all because of her mutant power. This is what causes Iska the Unbeaten to resign from the Great Ring of Araka, because she does feel that she has done things that make her unfit to sit at the seat of victory, because she doesn't understand loss. She's never lost a day in her life, at least not in any way that would matter to anyone else. And we also get to see in this issue how Iska the Unbeaten is judged. She's actually judged by the progenitor in the guise of Tarn the Uncaring of all people, and she is given a favorable thumbs up despite all the things she's done, because at the end of the day, the progenitor sees her as an unwilling participant in everything. Now, in another video, you'll hear me criticize him for not giving another character the same leniency, but that is neither here nor there. At the end of it all, this opens up the door for, with the entirety of the Dawn seats having been annihilated, because with Tarn the Uncaring dead, who sat at the seat of loss, for Idil, who sat at the seat of stalemate, and now Iska, who sat at the seat of victory, she has vacated her slot. That leaves the seats of Dawn completely open. This actually leads to Lotus Logos demanding that Arako make changes, the very same changes we talked about in the previous video, so I won't reiterate or rehash any of it here. This galvanizes Storm to give up her seat of All Around Us, basically the regency of Arako, the throne that she has kept this entire time, and her extra vote. Storm is giving this up because she feels that she can't be of two different people, that she can't sit two different thrones, because she is Krakoan, but she is also of Arako, at least more of an adoptive of Arako, and she doesn't feel she can pay attention to both sides equally. And given Magneto's last wish, it's actually not that out of the realm of possibility. She would want to get back to Krakoa so she can keep more of an eye on Charles Xavier. So she's giving up her extra vote. And while she is actively thinking about leaving the council altogether on Arako so she can spend more time on Krakoa, she is going to take the seat of loss in honor of Magneto, because she feels that's all that she knows right now. She recognizes Magneto as so many different things to her, as her enemy, her friend, her ally, her adversary. She sees him as so many different things, and that is why she is making this decision, in a way fulfilling Magneto's last wish, and at the same time also preserving one of the other things that he asked of her, and that is to ensure that Arako stands by Krakoa's side, because in the end, they will need them. And if you're wondering why Storm chose Lotus Logos to replace her with the seat of All Around Us, giving him the extra vote that would essentially give him a lot more power on the Great Ring, it's because of pretty much everybody on Arako, he's the one who seems the less rigid about following the old ways. He's actually interested in trying new things, not staying bogged down in tradition for tradition's sake. He is, I guess you could say, more of a progressive in that mindset, that is his political stance. He wants to move things forward for the better and try and do what's best for all peoples, not just some peoples. And this, honestly, I feel is the story arc that Storm needed, because I feel like one of the greatest criticisms of the House of X era was that Storm kind of seemed like an afterthought character that, you know, when House of X happened, she didn't really feature in it very much, outside of being the Morpheus in the scene in House of X number 5 that was very reminiscent of Matrix Reloaded or Matrix Resurrections, whichever was the one where everybody was dancing and jumping in slow motion in the air in Zion or whatever. But you know, it just, that was all she really did. She didn't really do anything else. She didn't take part in the suicide mission, and she pretty much just was in the background for the rest of that time. And while I think some people missed out on a lot of the characterization that she got during her time with the Marauders, she left the Marauders to take on more of an active role in Arako's government in the Sword series, and she's pretty much been estranged from the rest of Krakoan affairs for the most part ever since. And I think this is a lead-in towards Storm getting more involved in more X-Men related things, even though she won't be a part of the official X-Men team. But I just feel like we'll start seeing her more often in more Earth affairs as opposed to Arakan ones. Now, real quick before we get out of here, I do want to say I'm not going to really spend much time talking about what's going on with Cable, WizKid, and Abigail Brand, because these are all things I've been talking about for months. It's just that now we are finally being told by Al Ewing and Stefano Caselli that we are finally going to see Abigail Brand get her comeuppance, or maybe she won't. But the reveal that Cable now knows exactly what Abigail Brand knows, well, we already knew that information. It's just now that Cable and WizKid know. So I'm not spending any real actual time on this, albeit I do think it's a really cool moment with the click-clack and all that. All in all, fantastic book. Magneto got an amazing send-off. We got to see Magneto die a hero's death in the previous issue, and we get to see him have a hero's last words. And while I know some people aren't happy about the fact that, he is dying, the truth of the matter is, of all of the various characters in the X-Men's corner of the Marvel Comics universe, if there was one that was going to die and stay dead for a while, I don't think Magneto being that character is a bad thing. He has been around for a long time. He's gotten a crap ton of character development. Sometimes you gotta move out characters who have been around for a long time so the newer characters can get some, some face time, some panel time with the readers, and it is what it is. It's not to say he's gonna be dead forever. I'm sure he's gonna come back at some point because comic books, of course. But yeah, I think it's gonna be fine. We got to see a side of Magneto that we don't often get to see, and I think it was worth it. If you want to know more about everything that happened with Ten of Swords, check out this playlist up here. And if you want to know more about everything else that's been going on in Judgment Day, check out this playlist down here. In the meantime, let me know what you thought about X-Men Red #7. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.